All right, so today we're going to talk about how relationships are impacted by technology, okay? And we're calling this All By My Selfie. I'd like to say I came up with that title, but actually Scott Himes did. So there's some data that's coming out that's really incredible. I mean, we all know the power of smartphones, for example, that to think that there is more power in this, more computing capability in this than all the computers that were combined to put a man on the moon in 1969. That this has enough computing power that used to take entire buildings full of computers to have this kind of information that you have at your fingertips. But when you think about it, all this computing power really isn't any good if the internet wasn't developed at the same time. In the internet, as you know, and we've talked about this, these tools are not morally good or morally bad. It's how we use them. I mean, I can use my phone to read my Bible, I can listen to podcasts, I can talk to someone, pray with somebody on it. There's a lot of things I can do here that are good. But I can also have this lead me down a road of distraction, of sin. And it's all up to how we use these technologies. And like I said, today I'm going to focus particularly on the computers and its impact on our relationships. Remember how it used to be really weird when somebody said they met online? And everybody kind of went, well, we met online. And they'd almost be embarrassed about it. Now it's becoming much more acceptable. And it's actually swung quite a bit in the last 5 years, which is good. I mean, it's fine to meet somebody that way. The alternative is people don't want to go to parties or hang out in bars or something like that. So, online works. But along with, like I said, the good, it's also affecting our relationships. We are more connected than ever, but we are more lonely than ever in our world. And there's been some data that's come out. 2 big studies have come out. Multi-year studies have just come out in the last 6 months that really were kind of shocking to social scientists and sociologists. In one poll, they asked over 1,200 people about their relationships. 27% said they had no close friends. 27%. Isn't that crazy? And 25% said they had no acquaintances. That to me is just amazing. 27% have no close friends in their lives. 45% of adults say they find it difficult to make friends. 45%. The average person in this study, one study, said they had not made a new friend in 5 years. Now, for a lot of us that are connected in a spiritual family like this, we're shocked at that because we're always meeting people. We're in life groups, we're doing social things. So for a lot of people, this data is surprising and shocking. But it's the reality of the bigger society and culture that we're a part of. And the good news is you say, well, maybe that doesn't apply to me. It will. I'm going to show you the role that we have in helping to connect people. 82% said they felt like lasting friendships are hard to find. And the number one cause of people losing friendships, what would you think that is? What's that? Busy, one thing? It's people moving. How many have had a close friend move in the last 3 or 4 years? See? And that happens. So people are reluctant to invest in relationships that they think are just going to be migratory and move on. We work with one of the elementary schools here. We work with 3, but one in particular, Chapel Glen, we've worked with the longest in the community right down 10th Street. And Chapel Glen, they were telling me that their turnover rate every year with kids at an elementary school is 48%. Now think about that. Half the kids that were there last year, out of 900 kids, aren't this year. 450 new ones. So think about what that does. You know, you come into a school. Anybody ever change schools in elementary school or high school? Isn't that horrible? Because everybody knows each other. Even if you're little, they've already napped together and everything, you know. They've shared bottles, and you feel like you're the last one to the party, and you're not involved, and so you tend to isolate yourself a little bit more. And this is a real problem, and not just with kids, but with adults as well, because the average person only holds on to a job now about 3 years. So these relationships where you're celebrating somebody having their 20, 30-year anniversary at the company don't happen as much as they used to. Lives just aren't being built around those kind of relationships. So we're having to find new ways to connect. I like what Pat Morley, who wrote the book Man in the Mirror and heads up that ministry, he said this. He says, once I boasted to an acquaintance quite sincerely that I had hundreds of friends. Without pause, he said, no, you don't. You may have met hundreds of people, but there's no way you could really be friends with more than a handful of people. You'd be lucky if you have 3 real friends. Now, sociologists back this up. The average person has 16 relationships in their life. The average person. 3 are really close friends, maybe like lifelong friends. 5 more are people that they hang out with, that they'd be considered friends, and they see, you know, weekly, monthly, something like that. And then they have 8 more friends that they might see once a year, but they'd consider friends and they'd like to hang out with. They just don't get a chance to. So, how many friends do we need? Really just one. If you have somebody that you're committed to and they're committed to you, you can have one relationship. The problem is when you're their best friend and they're your only friend and they've got lots of other friends because they want to see all those other friends and you want to be besties. We want to do everything together and they feel kind of smothered, you know? So it's good to have more people in our lives, but one of the things that's really important about a healthy friendship, and this is what I want to spend a little bit of time on, how do we have really healthy friendships? How do we develop those, especially in a world where people are moving around so much? I think what marks relationships today that are good are 2 things. Number 1, they're timely, and secondly, they're truthful. Timely and truth. And what do I mean by that? Sometimes it's just having somebody that's close by. It might be a season. You might be going through something and you meet somebody that's gone through a similar thing. And they become a friend to help you walk through that. That relationship may not continue after that, but for that time, they helped get you through. Or maybe it was somebody you went through a year of school together with, or you went through a life group together with, or something else. Something you had this shared experience. It might not be lifelong. You hope it could be lifelong, but at least now it's timely. Then the other area is so important is truth. We need people to be there for us, but we also need people that will be honest with us. Proverbs 24:26 says, speaking honestly is a sign of true friendship. Proverbs 27 says it's better to be corrected openly if it stems from hidden love. You can trust a friend who wounds you with his honesty, but an enemy's pretended flattery comes from insincerity. We need people in our lives that are not just people that are there for us, but people that are honest with us. And that's tough. To have those friends that'll tell you there's something in your teeth, you know, or there's something hanging out of your nose. Or the worst we would do when you're in Bible college, you just think of all kinds of demonic stuff. And devil's always trying to get you to fall, you know. And so we'd have friends who were actually practicing on stage. They're preaching, you know, and that's a big thing. We'd go, your fly's open. Nothing will distract you worse than going, and they just stay behind the pulpit like this whole time. I detract. The point is, We need people that'll be real with us. We can't see the back of our neck. We don't know what's going on in our lives at times. And we need people that will be there and genuinely love us. Okay? There's a great example of this timely and honest or truthful kind of relationship in the Bible. There's a number of them, but I want to particularly focus on the relationship between Paul and Barnabas. In the book of Acts, we see the church just exploding. And this sent shockwaves through the religious people of today, the Pharisees. And one of the young zealots coming up in the Pharisaical party was Saul of Tarsus. And this guy was passionate about the Jewish faith. And so when he saw these Christians growing and many of the priests and scribes that were converting to Christianity, he just went insane. And he goes, we're going to shut this thing down. We're going to stop this attack. And so he went after and he began to persecute and began to arrest and probably responsible for the death of a number of early Christians. So Paul, in this rage and success that he's having to a goal to eliminate Christianity, he then moves up the road toward the next major city, Damascus. And it was on that road to Damascus, he has this encounter with God. God knocks him off his donkey. He's blinded by this light from God. And he immediately realizes that everything he's been doing, opposing Jesus, is wrong. Everything he's believed is wrong. And so they lead him into the city. Paul immediately begins to reorient his brain toward the Christian faith. The problem is he wants to be just as zealous for Jesus, but nobody trusts him. They just think that he's there to infiltrate their meetings. When we were back in the late 80s, we were in the Soviet Union planting a Bible college. And right when the wall was coming down and everything was changing there. And the minute the door was open, we got to go in and start this college. And so we were talking to churches and leaders in the area, and they were talking about what life was like under communism. And that the KGB was constantly trying to find the Christians' gatherings and infiltrate them. So it got to where what they would do is they wouldn't tell anybody where or when they were meeting. You just had to pray and God had to show you. And then they would show up and here's a couple hundred other believers. Because that's how they had to function in that day. You know? I mean, we put it on the internet and programs, and people still get here late and go, what time do we meet? So, but anyway, these people just had to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit to hear because they didn't want. And this is what the Christians were afraid of with the Apostle Paul. That even though he had had this conversion experience, they didn't trust that he really was as committed, that he was committed to Jesus. So Barnabas comes along. Barnabas, his name means son of encouragement. He comes alongside, he actually goes to Paul's hometown and finds him, and now he's changed his name from Saul to Paul. And he finds him, and he takes him to Jerusalem and introduces him around to Peter, James, and John, the apostles. And he says, look, I will vouch for this guy. I believe his faith is sincere. I believe that God is going to use him, and I will stand up for him. And Paul desperately needed that. And as a result, they developed this timely friendship. And they traveled doing a missionary journey together. And one of the people that had come along on that missionary journey was John Mark. Now, John Mark was Barnabas' nephew. And he had come along on this trip, but when they got to a town called Pamphylia, they started facing some persecution. And people started pushing back, and they were kind of worried for their lives. John Mark bailed on them. He says, I'm out of here. It's just too much for me. So they made it back. They get back to Jerusalem. They're getting ready to make the next trip out. And Barnabas says, hey, I want to take John Mark with us. And Paul said, no way. He bailed on us last time. In Acts 15, the latter part of the chapter, beginning around, I think, verse 36, you get this dissension, actual conflict, and the language is very strong in the Greek language it's used there. They are really opposed to each other. They're going toe-to-toe here. And Paul said, he's not coming. And Barnabas probably said, well, if he's not coming, then I'm not coming. And Paul probably said, fine, God bless you. I mean, this is the language. This is the kind of tension that's happening here. And I'm sure Barnabas said, well, God bless you too. And, man, I really love you. And he goes, yeah, I love you too, but we've got to go our own ways. So Paul goes on, spreads the gospel through the whole of Western culture at the time. And this day, we owe our faith a lot to the Apostle Paul for his writings and his missionary journeys after that. What happened with Barnabas? Barnabas took John Mark, discipled him, and we have the gospel of Mark today because of Barnabas investing in John Mark's life. So who was right and who was wrong? They both were. And they were both passionate about what they believed. And they both felt like they were following God. But they went in two different directions. And that's going to happen at times. Some relationships are going to be seasonal. They're going to be for a time. And when they're ended, we can't lament them. We just have to move on. Now, if you're sitting out there and say, does that apply to my marriage? No. Marriage is different. That's a covenant. Two people becoming one. You're stuck. You better work it out. That's my whole marriage counseling in one thing. You're stuck. Work it out. This is God's intention, and we can help you with that. And then your life can be wonderful. You can have a better marriage than you've ever had. But this is not a seasonal connection. It's for life. And for those of you that have been divorced, we don't condemn you. We're not up here to put you down or anything like that. But we believe that it's a wonderful thing when God can take a covenant and restore it. And I've watched him do that in some marriages, and it's a beautiful thing. So, Proverbs 27, I've been referring a lot to Proverbs 27, a lot of the text is coming from there. Solomon says, sweet friendship refreshes the soul and awakens our heart with joy, for good friends are like the anointing oil that yields the fragrant incense of God's presence. That's what a really good friend does for you. I mean, when you're around them, they lift you up. They encourage you. If you're in a bad mood or you've had a bad day and they come around, you just feel better. Life's just good. If you just have them to go through it with you. And sometimes this can be a family member too, but I'm thinking particularly about good friends that are close by, that are right there in your life. I would ask you, how many of you have friends like that? Instead, I'd rather ask you this question. How many of you are friends like that? Because see, that's something we can choose to do. It's something we can choose to be. And I think that this is something that really is important in the body of Christ. We cannot allow ourselves to be so distracted that people aren't important in our lives. That people that we love, people that we care for, people that could lift us up or that we need to lift up, that we're just too busy and too bothered and we're binge watching this or get lost on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, and I know what that's like. I can find myself in that place. And you've invested all this time and energy into it, and then all of a sudden you're done and like, oh, well, where did the time go? Oh, I was going to call that person, but now it's too late. I was going to connect with them, but I'm too busy. Oh, I just forgot. And I believe that this is a strategy of the enemy to isolate us. Not only do we need those connections, but I think they really need to be at times face-to-face. Even today, we're restricting our communication more and more. Have you noticed this trend? I hate this trend, but it's a trend. You can't call anybody anymore. you have to text them first to see if it's okay to call them. Raise your hand if you're aware of that. Okay, while you've got your hand raised, I will never do that to Pastor Tony. I'm just kidding. Sometimes I'll just call people just for the sake of doing it, and they'll answer, what is it? I just want to see what you're up to. People don't do that anymore. We're all too busy. And we lose those kind of connections that I think are so critical. And not only that, we need the face-to-face connections. Because when you're with somebody, you not only hear their tone, but you can look into the window of their soul through their eyes. And you can see their body language and all those nonverbal cues. And you can really know better what's happening. And John said it this way. He said, I have much to write to you, but I do not want to use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to visit you and talk with you face to face so that our joy may be complete. See? We just got to make the time. We just got to do it. And the relational investment you make with people, I believe, always comes back to us. I believe it's something God really honors because that's his heart. Now, of course, some relationships aren't healthy. Listen to Paul's warning here in 2 Corinthians chapter 6. He doesn't mince words here. Look at this. Don't continue to team up with unbelievers in mismatched alliances. For what partnership is there between righteousness and rebellion? Who could mingle light with darkness? What harmony can there be between Christ and Satan? Or what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? What friendship does God's temple have with demons? For indeed, we are the temple of the living God, just as God has said, I will make my home in them and walk with them, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. Wow, is that direct? So, if God is saying, I don't want you to connect with people that aren't walking in the same direction as you, how could we ever reach out to anybody? How could we show God's love to people that are far from God? Well, I think what Paul is talking about here is not an intimate relationship as much as he's talking about influence. Are these people influencing you to turn away from God? If you have friends that the only way you can hang out with them is to go to the club, or to watch something you don't want to watch, or do what they want to do, then that's probably not a healthy friendship. There should be give and take. You should actually be influencing them to draw closer to God. See? And I think what happens many times, we tend to, as Christians, that the further we go in our faith, the safer it is to just cloister together with other Christians. And we just want to hang out with each other. And that's a fun thing. It's nice to be part of a spiritual family where we all have some similar values. We all believe some of the same stuff. When we know we go together, we don't have to worry about having who's the designated driver when we go home. It can just be a great time. The problem is, Jesus called us to a mission, and that's to love broken people. And by the way, too, you're going to run across a lot of Christians that are broken people, too. If your expectations are way up here, you need to lower that bar. Otherwise, you're going to get disappointed. You're going to realize that Christians love Jesus, but they're still kind of messed up inside. They still have baggage. They still have issues. We've got to find this balance. A few years ago, Lori and I went up to Napanee, Indiana, just spending the night up there to bed and breakfast. And a lady said, oh, you're a religious person, because I let slip out as a pastor. You always tell people that have no connection with the church or anything, you're a religious person. And I wanted to get in the difference between religion and Christianity, but I didn't. I said, yeah. I was tired. I was on vacation. So she says, oh, I know an Amish couple that have people over to their house for dinner. And I went, oh, that'd be awesome. So Lori and I connect with this man. We had to call him at his neighbor's house. We had to yell at him. He's got a phone call, and he had to go outside to the telephone pole to answer the phone and talk to me, and then, and that's how it's done, because they can't have phones in their house. So it's one of a million questions I had, And so we go over to their house. The man was just so kind. He took us on a buggy ride, and we took pictures of him, which he asked us not to then. We were really embarrassed. And then it was time for dinner. We went in the house, and they lit the stove and lit these oil lamps and everything, and the food was amazing, and we just had a great time. And we're talking, and he says, you can ask me anything about our faith and so on. And he would just start talking about Jesus, and big tears streaming down his face. I went, oh, this is so cool, because this man really loves God. And as we talked further tonight, I said, I've got a question for you. How do you fulfill the Great Commission? How do you fulfill Jesus' command to go into the world and preach the gospel? Because Jesus was called a friend of sinners, and he hung out with publicans and sinners. He hung out with the riffraff. How do you fulfill that in your faith? And because I was paying for this dinner, so I was getting some answers. He was real kind. He just said, we try to live out our faith in such a way that that's a witness. And I thought, well, that's kind of weak, And these are godly people, but this is where they are in their faith. They are so afraid of being contaminated by the world that they just withdraw. And Jesus didn't do that. Jesus engaged his world. He was an influencer. He would go into a party and everybody would be drawn to him. And this is what he's called us to do, because we take his presence with us when we go places. So Jesus should be in the clubs. He should be in the bars. He should be in the places. I was reading an incredible story about one lady that has this ministry to dancers and women who strip and dance in clubs. And she reaches out to these women, and she goes there every week to just love them and take them gifts and do a Bible study with them, pray with them. And I thought, what an incredible ministry to love people that way. It's not in judgment. It's not putting them down. It's just loving them where they are, starting right there. And this is what Jesus has called us to do. We're called to be influencers. We're called to make a difference in this world. And to do that, we're going to have to make some time. And we're going to have to get a little messy. Years ago, we used to say it this way, but that doesn't apply anymore. We're going to have to sit in the smoking section. We're going to have to go out of our way to love people. And here's the good news. If people are this lonely, and these studies are showing more than any other time in our history, people are feeling more lonely and isolated, what a wonderful opportunity to maybe invite somebody over for a meal, to have a barbecue and say, hey, why don't you come hang out at our house for the evening? Why don't you come over and watch the game with me? Let's do this together. I believe that God has postured the church to be an answer for the problems going on in our world. And I think the loneliness that's expressed out there in people is just an opportunity for us to be able to fill that gap. Not just to convert them. Not to walk away and go, yeah, they're pretty evil, but I almost got them. God's going to get them. But to genuinely love people and say, help me understand your life. Help me understand how your life has gone, how you've gotten to where you are today. And then we look for places where Jesus can intersect their life. There's a couple drawings I want to put up real quick. I'll close with this. We all have spheres of influence around us. We all connect in different places. And, here's you right in the middle. You can either stay there and keep your walls up around you, because I think some people in the world, that's their little life. Just all they are in all these places, but there's this big barrier around them, and they're not connected. We need to see that as these are gateways. These are gateways to connect with people. People at your job are probably lonely people, especially if they're new to town. We have people come in every Sunday that are brand new to Vineyard Life Church because they're new to town or they've just moved to this part of town and they're trying to connect. We want to fulfill that. That's why life groups are so important to us. That's why we get together often and try to connect with people. And it's more just beyond the life group. But what if we started seeing all these and these things over here as well? What if we began to see these as opportunities to connect with people? What if God would begin to put people on our heart in our neighborhood or in our workplace, or in our family, or maybe people we need to connect with in church? Hobbies, kids' activities. There are lots of places out there to connect with people. And I believe that God, once we open our life up, He begins to direct us and He begins to guide our lives into those relationships where we can have a really important impact in somebody else's life. We can be that kind of friend that we want because we're being that to somebody else. So that's my challenge to you. And what I want us to do here, just to have a little lab session real quick, we're going to take the next few minutes to worship and kind of close out the service as we do each week. But during this next 5 minutes or so, what I want to do is take a moment and just close our eyes and connect with God. Open ourselves up. And as you look at each of these circles, work, family, neighborhood, church, maybe you want to scratch one of those out and put something else in. But who are in those circles that God's putting on your heart to just be kind to just maybe go out of your way to say hello to ask how they're doing, to begin to pray for them and ask God to open doors in their life, to begin to invest in relationship with them. Let's do that right now.